Hello, BookTube. I've got a tag for you today on this cloudy, rain-threatening Thursday. It started out brassy and bright and hot and sunny, but that has changed completely. The day is now much cooler, the wind is picking up, and the clouds are everywhere, piled high. I think we may be getting rain, maybe even a whole night of thunder and lightning. And I have a tag for you that I'm shocked to see that I was tagged in a while ago and never got to. I know it's probably not the video that some of you want to see. I leave my email on every video. Keep in mind that is not a dummy email, that is my inbox. So I get emails on any subject under the sun. I welcome it. I'm honored by it. Several of you will email me about what is in my latest video, but you will also email about videos you'd like to see, but also about non-BookTube items. Lost track of how many emails I get about dogs. And I love to do that. I love to answer those, hear about those, see pictures and whatnot. Also, problems with family, problems with health, problems with work, all that sort of thing. And I've received emails from a great number of you wanting to know when I'm going to make my response video to the Booker long list for 2021. The long list for the Booker Prize was announced. And I'm not going to make a response video to the Booker long list because I know I like to do digressions of all kinds on this channel. I sometimes do them without intending, sometimes they are my intention, but I still like to keep this channel mostly about books. And the Booker long list, the Booker Prize in 2021, I would argue every literary prize in 2021, has nothing at all to do with books. The books are merely the vehicle for which other things are being done. And the other things, if you want my response to the Booker long list, the other thing actually has a name. It's something called the progressive stack. You can Google that and get a nice pictorial of what it looks like. But what it essentially amounts to is the way in the 21st century that 21st century bigots codify their bigotry. The progressive stack gives you the exact gradations of where you may not be prejudiced, where you may not be bigoted, and you can express more open and more sweeping bigotry in each category the further down the progressive stack you go until you get to the bottom. And the bottom you can treat in a worse way than Pentecostal white Southerners treated black people in the 1910s in America. The bottom of the progressive stack you can say any kind of sweeping, utterly bigoted statement that you want and expect to be applauded for it rather than condemned for it. But the higher on the progressive stack you go, the less you can say, even of a critical nature, even when criticism is warranted. The progressive stack now, I believe, completely rules all literary prizes, all academia, all of the plastic arts, the filmmaking, whatnot. And I think it clearly dictated the Booker long list. It will certainly dictate the Booker short list, and it will certainly dictate the winner. And the progressive stack doesn't have any literary qualities in it. It has nothing to do with literature. It wasn't invented for that reason, and it hasn't been perverted for that reason either. I don't believe that the literary quality of the long list books is important at all, and it's the only thing that I feel in any way qualified to comment on. So I can't really do that, right? I'm not going to spend the 2 hours biographical researching on Facebook and the internet in order to learn the things about the authors on the long list that are the only things that are of any interest to anyone. I've watched a whole bunch of reaction videos. All the reaction videos are the same. They are demographic polling. They are, what's your ethnic background? What's the precise color gradation of your skin? Who do you sleep with? What's your surgical status pre or post? Did your grandparents get driven from their homeland with just the shirts on their back? All the sorts of stuff that you could learn in 2 hours of Googling the author, but that don't have anything to do with the words on the page. And none of the YouTube Booker reaction videos that I've seen even seem to care. They're all just happily going about the demographic census taking. And I'm not interested in that at all. I realize that puts me out of step with the times, because I believe this is what's going to happen in every literary prize for the rest of this year, or I would argue for the rest of our lives. The progressive stack will determine everything. So if I'm right about that, that, well, I mean, one of the fun elements of making a reaction video to a literary long list, one part of the fun of such a video is to sort of make your own guesses as to who will be in the short list and eventually who will win, right? I've made videos like that myself. It used to be that that was one of the fun things to do. And one of the very strongest elements involved that would inform those predictions would be the quality of the books involved. If I'm right and the quality of the books don't matter at all, the judges won't read them, the judges will only read biographical packets given to them about the authors, then there's no point in making that prediction. It will be easy to predict who will be on the short list and who will win based solely on the progressive stack. Who has the most categories? Who is the highest on the progressive stack? Those people will be on the short list, and the person who wins it all will be the winner, provided they don't go on social media and speak their mind on any subject. They must speak groupthink. They must have the condoned opinions, and those condoned opinions must go back all the way to the beginning of their social media accounts, which will be scoured. So, and there are firms that exist now that charge a pretty penny for public figures in order to not scrub, not destroy their social media backlog, but to go through it and shape it according to the current political opinions of 2021. Go back all the way to 2005 and shape all of that stuff and leave no footprints, no digital footprints behind, so that when that scouring of your personal record is done, which, keep in mind, is totally irrelevant to your book and shouldn't be done at all, once that's done, you'll be in the clear. You'll have all the right opinions going all the way back to 2010. Since that's involved, since that's the only thing involved, what difference does it make what my prediction is? I can predict, if I were willing to do the 2 hours of biographical research per author, genealogical research, ethnographic research, a thorough scouring of their social media pronouncements to make sure that none of them disagree with anything that I think. If I were to be willing to do that for 2 hours per author and collate my results, I could easily guess who would win. But that's not literary. It has nothing to do with books. So I'm not going to be doing any kind of reaction video to the Booker long list, to the Booker short list, to the Booker winner. I'm not going to be doing any kind of reaction video to the Nobel Prize or the National Book Award or the Pulitzer or anything like that. Instead, we'll just do a tag. We'll just do a nice getaway tag, a tag that takes us away from such political turmoil. And this is a tag that specifically does that because it's travel oriented. This is the Interrail/Eurorail book tag that was created by Mark at Book Time with Elvis, and he actually tagged me. And it just went right past me. It just went right past me. So if you can bear the 7-minute throat clearing at the beginning, I just wanted to clear that up. I don't know how many people are going to be watching this video, but if people email me, I will happily explain if nobody watched this video. That's why I won't be talking about the Booker long list, because it doesn't have anything to do with books. The Booker Prize doesn't have anything to do with books. It has to do with 21st century politics, Twitter politics. And those are fundamentally uninteresting to me, especially when they are imported into a realm that is of interest to me. I am very much interested in books. It's just books aren't involved here. So it's who is your lover this year? Who was your lover 10 years ago? Did you have the right opinion about George W. Bush when he was in office? If you weren't yet born when George W. Bush was in office, did your parents have the right opinions? And did they express them in the right ways? That sort of stuff is what passes for literary judgment these days, but it doesn't interest me. So we're gonna stick to travel instead, which I don't do anymore. Keep in mind, but I can dream in this tag. The prompts start with London. Dr. Johnson said, "When a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. For there is in London all that life can afford." Salt marshes in London, yeah. Desert chaparral in London, wildlife in London, yeah. What book can you read, reread, and read again and again throughout your life? And there are a few books like this. There's about 30 books like this for me. The one that came first to mind, because it deals with far-flung lands, is Herodotus. The Histories of Herodotus I've read, I don't even know how many times, I've no idea. And I love it. Dearly, dearly love it. Sherlock Holmes lived, so to speak, at 221B Baker Street. Have you ever visited the home of an imaginary character, and if so, whose? I first was going to just peremptorily say no to this. Then I realized I have, and the longer I thought about it, the longer a list I came up with. Like, for instance, the old reading room of the British Museum. Not the way it is now, but the way it used to be when it was a functional library reading room. I've spent a lot of time in the old round reading room of the British Museum back then, before it was shut down and then renovated and is in its current form. And that ties directly into a Max Beerbohm story, Enoch Soames, who it makes a deal with the devil in 1897 to come back in 100 years. And one of the places that people were just in the story, it's sort of promised that he will come back to the reading room of the British Museum in 1997. And the people, lots of literary people, were just waiting to see if the ghost of Enoch Soames shows up. And so, I mean, I wasn't one of those people. I was done with traveling by then. But I have spent an enormous amount of time in that room, so I guess that counts. Another thing that came to mind is The House of the Seven Gables in Salem, which is a great novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, but it's also a real place. And in Hawthorne's book, it's the home of the cursed Pynchon family, and I've been to the House of the Seven Gables, so that counts. And what about Pompeii? The buried city of Pompeii. I have not only been to the touristy areas of Pompeii, but I've had very good, in-depth tours of the non-tourist areas of Pompeii. And I naturally thought about Marcus Attilius, the water engineer in Robert Harris's great novel, Pompeii. I thought about him. He's walking around when the whole place is real, living. So there's a literary place that I've been to. I don't think that it was never my intent, but nevertheless, I have been to those places. So it definitely counts. And I'm sure that I can make that list a lot longer. Then the next prompt here, believe it or not, is a quote from Three Men in a Boat. Maybe Mark has it bad for that book. Harris asked me if I'd ever been in the maze at Hampton Court. Have you ever been lost in a book and not in a good way? Did you completely lose the plot and not have the slightest idea what was going on? Please give an example. This has never happened to me. I have never been lost in a book in the sense of not knowing where I was. I've been lost in a book in the sense of no longer having any thinking at all that the author is in any control of what they're doing. But I always know what's going on. I've never had to just give up because I don't have any idea what's happening in the book. What happens is I reach that horrible moment, and it's not the horrible moment of saying, I have no idea what's happening here. Instead, it's the horrible moment of saying, the author has no idea what's happening here. And as a critic, I must find a way to comment on that. So I don't actually have an example of that. You head to St Pancras station and board the Eurostar to Paris, and within a couple of hours, you arrive at the Gare du Nord. The Père Lachaise Cemetery is on your itinerary. Have you been there, or have you ever made a pilgrimage to any literary site? What are some of the best historical sites you have ever visited? In terms of literary pilgrimages, the best historical sites that I have ever visited are every single inch of London, every single inch of Florence, and every single inch of Boston. 3 cities among many that I could name, but 3 cities that are absolutely saturated with literature. The same thing could be said of Paris, where you're just saturated with literature, where every street, every corner, every park, every place calls something literary to mind. I've done that many, many times, never intentionally. I was there for other reasons, because I was traveling, not because I was making a literary pilgrimage. But nevertheless, every inch. I think probably the thing that wins in that regard is London. But I'll count that as an answer to this question. Gertrude Stein famously said, "America is my country, and Paris is my hometown." What is your country? What town other than your own have you felt at home in? My country is the United States of America, which has its problems, lots of them. And because it's the United States of America, our problems are your problems. Our problems are the world's problems. Unfortunately, in the last few years, America's problems have been third world military dictatorship style problems that really shouldn't be the problems of the rest of the world. I don't doubt at all that this informs a lot of the anti-American sentiments that I encounter all the time, and that I used to encounter all the time. It's an annoying thing when you are a country of your own, with a robust literary and historical tradition, and yet so much of what happens in your geopolitical world is determined by this big, blustering, stupid, corrupt country thousands of miles from where you are. That will generate resentment. My country is the United States of America, and I love it. But it's harder and harder to make that case. and in terms of places where I have felt at home, a town that I have felt at home, well, I feel at home in Boston, very much so. I know every breath, every scrap of mitochondria that Boston has, but also Venice. I have felt the same way about Venice. Lots of other places too. Austin at one point in its history, Hermosa Beach at one point in its history, but mostly Boston and Venice. I felt in both cases that I was at home, that I knew them, and I felt great. Cafes are everywhere in Paris. Yes, I like to sit in one for even a couple of hours, skimming through a book or people watching. If you have ever been to Paris, where's your favorite place to visit and favorite thing to do there? I have been to Paris. I'm also fond of sort of sitting and dog watching out in public. And one of my favorite places is the Bibliothèque de l'Arsenal, an old, beautiful building, part antique library, part art museum. Wonderful feel to it. Wonderful feel of walking around it. I really could. It could have spent all day there, and I did spend many days there. So that's probably one highlight for me. I've made it clear on this channel before that Paris is, well, it's not my favorite city in the world. I know that's absolute heresy. It's supposed to be, but it's not. And mainly because of the people that I met there were obnoxious and inhospitable in ways that I just seldom encountered anywhere else. And that has an effect. I try not to, but that has an effect. I always think it's kind of ironic, that the traveling shorthand will always be that Germans are very standoffish, very icy, at least at first, and not very welcoming. Whereas in Paris, it's la vie bohème. It's very artisanal, very free spirited and welcoming. I always found the exact opposite was true. When I traveled in Germany and Austria, yes, a little bit of reserve towards a stranger, but it was easy for it to be dropped right away. Whereas in Paris, that flaneur outward exterior is dropped, and what's underneath it is awful. So just a whole city full of obnoxious, brainless Milanese runway models, that one way or another. Not my favorite place, but I have nevertheless lots of fond memories of walking around the bookshops, that sort of thing. After a few days of eating pain chocolates and drinking one too many café au lait, you decide to head south. You head to the Gare du Nord and board a train to Madrid. It will take you 11 hours and 26 minutes, and you will travel 654 miles. What is the longest train journey you have ever taken? Well, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are new to this channel, I've done a huge amount of traveling. I don't travel anymore, but I've done a huge amount of traveling in my life, and the longest train journey that I ever took is, I believe, still the record holder for the longest train journey of them all, and that's the Trans-Siberia Railroad, Moscow to Vladivostok. A very, very long trip that is not always hospitable. Certainly there were long chunks of it that I was on that were not hospitable at all. But nevertheless, I felt like I needed to do it. Have you any favorite books or films set on trains? Can there be any answer to this question other than Snowpiercer? Snowpiercer is the ultimate train movie. And what a movie! You are lucky that you can ride in comfort through France and over the Pyrenees into Spain, unlike Captain Jack Aubrey, who in Post Captain has to don a bear suit and answer to the name Flora in order to cross the mountains. Have you got a favorite book featuring a manhunt and or subterfuge? I do have a favorite book for a manhunt. It's a book I've mentioned before on this channel. Robert Harris, who wrote Silence of the Lambs, wrote a sequel called Hannibal that I think is terrific, and a large chunk of which is a manhunt for Hannibal Lecter. I just think up until the end, up until the last 30 pages of the book, I think it's just an amazing, amazing novel. So I'm gonna say Hannibal for this one. The Spanish national anthem famously does not have any words. If you have seen them singing at football matches, they are really just humming along to a tune. What is your favorite instrumental-only piece of music? Are you prone to whistling? I'll do the second one first. I am not prone to whistling. I don't know how to whistle. But in terms of instrumental music, I am a big fan of classical music. I really, really love it. My tastes are not rarefied. I'm a big fan of classical music, and it's almost all classical music that you would know. I don't think that makes me a plebeian. If it does, I have no apologies for being a plebeian. Like, for instance, the Glenn Gould recording, the first Glenn Gould recording of the Goldberg Variations of Johann Sebastian Bach, I think are absolutely incredible. Just absolutely incredible. I can listen to it forever. It doesn't matter how popular it is. Also, I mean, Bach just, he wins pretty much hands down all across the board. Like, for instance, the Partita in E major, which is, I've heard it done many, many times. I've heard it performed by Itzhak Perlman, and I thought that was just amazing. And, you know, there's all of Beethoven. I can't use the ninth because has to be instrumental only. But all the others, all of Beethoven is incredible, including the late string quartets. The late string quartets of Beethoven, I think, are, I don't know, I love them, but I often characterize them as this monumental, brooding genius actively trying to push the boundaries of what classical music is in order to convey some of the things that he wanted it to. The early quartets are delightful. The middle quartets are, of course, very famous. The late quartets, though, to me, are one of the most surreal listening experiences in classical music. I used to have a whole set by the Orion String Quartet, and I really liked the job they did. I don't have any music anymore here. No records, no CDs, no nothing like that. Classical music that I listen to exclusively on YouTube. But I used to have a whole set of those and really liked them. Let's see here. Kronos/Saturn, Devouring His Son by Francisco Goya is, to my mind, one of the most disturbing paintings I have seen. And you can see it, too, if you visit the Prado Museum in Madrid. What is one of the most disturbing books and or paintings you have ever seen? This doesn't really work for me. I've seen that painting in Madrid, and it's creepy, but I don't get disturbed in the way that I think this question is asking for. The closest that I would come would be the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, which is full of garbage. It's full of junk. And those paintings, the paintings among them, did disturb me. If anger is a disturbance, and I think it is, anger is an energy, as the old song used to go. A trip through the MoMA can't fail to infuriate me, to just white-knuckled rage. It's just a gigantic inverted ziggurat. It's a monument to fraud. But in terms of viscerally disturbing me, like, oh, this is a creepy painting or a creepy book, it's not a reaction I tend to have. Let's see here. Watching Kronos having his dinner has given you an appetite, so you repair to a restaurant to try Spain's national dish, the paella. If I were to visit your hometown, what restaurant would you take me to, and what would be the dish you would most recommend? Once upon a time, I would have taken you to a place called Loch Ober here in Boston, where I was known and where we would have had pretty much anything that you ordered off the menu would have been lip-smackingly delicious. But my sensibilities along these lines have changed over the decades. Now I infinitely prefer getting food and bringing it here, bringing it to the room and sitting around talking, where every new thing that comes to the table is not costing us an extra $10, where the help is not waiting for it to bus our table, where there are no obnoxious neighbors, where the only obnoxious person in the room is me. I have grown to infinitely prefer that to time spent in a restaurant. So if you were to visit Boston, which I strongly urge you to do, if you were to visit Boston, there's a fry shop 2 doors away from Hyde Cottage. Very basic fare, very delicious, very generous portions, and we would go there on a little walk so that we get Frida nice and aired out. We would go there, we would order food, we would pick it up, I would pay for it, we'd bring it all back here and eat to the wee small hours. I infinitely prefer that to going to a restaurant where you're here, where I have, you know, a rack full of wine that we can go through and we can talk about all that we want. We don't have to worry about anything. And I don't have to be away from my dogs. I think that's probably where that sentiment changed for me. Because my previous 2 dogs, my girls, got sick together. They declined into old age together, and then they got sick together, and then they were really sick at the same time. And it hit me worse. I've had many, of course, I've had a whole lifetime of dogs. They get older, they get sick, and then they die. And that's happened to me many times. But something about the girls really hit me hard. I think probably because they were the whole world to each other, and it was happening to them at the same time. But one way or another, once that started happening, once they started requiring lots of care, I think that's when my attitude changed towards restaurants just in general, not just with you, but also my hole-in-the-wall Chinese food restaurant where I used to go several times a week to read periodicals in complete peace, not a word of English spoken. And just a tiny little place, my table, same food, I knew the staff, I'd known them for generations. I stopped doing that at the same time as I stopped going to restaurants with people unless it's an exigent circumstance. And now I infinitely prefer it. If you come to Boston, and I suggest once the weather cools off that you do, that's what I want to do. We'll order food at the fry shop next door. They even have some vegetarian options, if that's what you want to do. And we'll bring it back here. There'll be plenty of wine, lots of books. The whole room is lined in books. There'll be Frida, and we will talk into the wee small hours. And then Mark wraps up the tag by saying, we will pause in our journey for now. But if you enjoyed it up until now, we will continue in the near future. I say, yes, absolutely. It's the only kind of traveling I'm going to do anymore. So let's have another URL tag. And this time, the next time it happens, I'll try to be a little more timely in getting to it. One way or another. It was a nice Thursday tag. Lots and lots of fun. I've got a couple of other tags that I want to do, including one where one of you sent me the questions in translation. How much fun will that be? But anyway, I want to do this tag. I also wanted to give you a little heads up. Those of you who've been emailing me that I'm not going to do a video about the Booker. So I mean, I feel sorry about that. I like talking about those things, but there'd be no point. So I'm gonna wrap up this tag for now, and I will leave a link to Mark's video down below. Because if you haven't done this, I'd very much like you to do this. But anyway, I'm gonna wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.